Welcome to the March 2022 edition of Learning Well, produced by the Integrative Health Education Center at Normandale Community College in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm your host, Elise Markram-Johns, and we hope our monthly conversations on this program will add to your health and happiness by providing interesting as well as practical information for you, your family, and friends as you pursue your health and wellness journey. Thousands of people have had near-death experiences, but scientists have argued that they are impossible. Well, our guest today, Dr. Eben Alexander, was one of those scientists. A highly trained neurosurgeon, Dr. Alexander knew that near-death experiences feel real, but are simply fantasies produced by brains under extreme stress. But in 2012, Dr. Alexander contracted bacterial meningitis and spent 7 days in a coma. The part of the brain that controls thought and emotion, and in essence makes us human, shut down completely. And his doctors gave him a 2% chance of survival. He not only survived, but made a miraculous full recovery. During his illness, he had a near-death experience which forever altered his life. And in just a few moments, we'll be talking with Dr. Alexander about his experience, how it impacted his life, and how his beliefs have changed. But before I introduce Dr. Alexander, I want to let you know that the producer of our program, Normandale Community College, provides the largest selection of holistic health and wellness classes, workshops, and certification training in the entire Midwest. And courses are designed for health professionals and healing practitioners, as well as individuals who are interested in furthering their knowledge in the areas of health education and integrative healing practice. Day, evening, and weekend offerings include individual classes as well as practitioner training certificate programs in fields such as Ayurveda, aromatherapy, energy medicine, herbalism, and healing touch, just to name a few. But if you would like more information or to register for any upcoming classes, you can reach the Integrative Health Education Center at 952-358-8343, or simply go online to normandale.edu/CE/classes and browse the course catalog. Well, now, without further ado, let me introduce our guest, Dr. Eben Alexander. Dr. Alexander was an academic neurosurgeon for over 25 years, including 15 years at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, Children's Hospital, and Harvard Medical School. And in 2012, while in a week-long coma from a brain infection, he underwent a near-death experience, also referred to as an NDE. And despite a very bleak prognosis, he awoke from the coma and made a miraculous return to full health, as I indicated earlier. But since his NDE, Dr. Alexander has been reconciling his rich spiritual experience with quantum physics, cosmology, and the philosophy of mind, and also wrote the book Proof of Heaven, A Neurosurgeon's Journey into the Afterlife in 2012. In 2014, he wrote The Map of Heaven, How Science, Religion, and Ordinary People Are Proving the Afterlife. And his most recent book in 2017 is Living in a Mindful Universe, A Neurosurgeon's Journey into the Heart of Consciousness. And it was co-authored with Sacred Acoustics co-founder Karen Newell, and has garnered accolades from scientists around the world who probe the mind-body-spirit question and seek to unlock the very nature of consciousness. Dr. Alexander has been featured in more than 400 media interviews, including ABC TV's Good Morning America in 2020, The Dr. Oz Show, Oprah's Super Soul Sunday, Larry King, and I could go on and on. A graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Dr. Alexander received his medical degree from Duke University School of Medicine in 1980. He taught neurosurgery at Harvard Medical School in Boston for 15 years and has performed over 4,000 neurosurgical operations. Now, he speaks around the world about the role that consciousness plays in wellness and recovery, citing the mounting wealth of evidence on the spontaneous remissions of thousands of patients who have made startling recoveries despite supposed terminal medical conditions. Since his NDA, Dr. Alexander has dedicated himself to sharing information about near-death experiences and what they teach us about consciousness and the nature of reality. Dr. Alexander, welcome to Learning Well, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, Elise, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be with you today.
Well, I was so fascinated by your book, Proof of Heaven, and I was also really interested in the fact that in the prologue of the book, you recount a skydiving experience that you had on a beautiful autumn Saturday in 1975. And we should share with our viewers why you included that particular story in the prologue of your book.
Well, I think the main reason was I came to realize through my journey that our kind of our realm of mental influence is very different from what I normally would have thought of before, where I thought brain creates consciousness, that there's this kind of slow plodding along of the nervous system to track events. And yet that particular adventure I had, which showed a split second reaction to a situation that, if I thought about it and worked it through my mind in terms of how best to respond, I couldn't have possibly done it. And yet I did. And that was way back in 1975. And in essence, it was giving me a clue. It was tipping the hat basically to reveal to me some powers of mind and of free will that far exceed what I would have postulated as a materialist scientist, believing brain creates consciousness. And it was a perfect example of how, in many ways, our intuitive sense, the ability to discern synchronicities and kind of deep relationships in the universe is something that transcends much of our normal kind of slowly plotting thinking about things and trying to organize how we believe it works. So it was just a beautiful example to me of free will manifesting far beyond the limits of what our physical bodies and brains might be subject to.
And you also touched on something else that I'd love to have you talk about a little bit, if you would. You thought it was important to include, and it certainly was interesting to hear that you were adopted and how it impacted you later in life and why you decided to talk about it in your book initially. It comes into play later in the book, but I don't want to spoil that. We'll get to that later.
Right. Well, it's an absolutely essential part of the story, as you go through to the incredible ending of it all, as people who've read Proof of Heaven will realize. But, it's because it's a huge part of my story. I mean, most of what I shared in there, I shared a lot of hardships and difficulties I'd faced and challenges in my life, things like that. And I just wanted to share, every bit of what was there. And an absolutely essential part of understanding me and my journey and the benefit of this near-death experience is acknowledging the fact that I was put up for adoption when I was 11 days old. I basically had that abandonment wound from my birth mother, and the story is far more complex than that, a lot more nuanced than that. But the essence is, for much of my life, and especially as I explain in the book Proof of Heaven, beginning about 8 years before my coma in early 2000, I had a perceived rejection from my birth mother. I had long ago gotten used to the fact she wasn't looking for me and given up on looking for her. But then it was because of a school project, my older son, Eben IV, that I was then compelled to send yet another letter to the children's home to see if my birth mother was still out there. And I got a giant surprise to all of that, which is an essential part of the story. And it had to do with that perceived rejection. It has to do with the fact that my birth parents had actually gotten married. And that's something that I never, ever considered as remotely possible. And not only that, they had 3 children, but that their youngest daughter had died 2 years earlier. That would have been 1998. And the story from the social worker who relayed this to me in a 2-minute phone call that changed my life was a very limited story. She didn't really know all of the thinking that went behind it all. But the way she interpreted it for me was, she just said, because they lost their daughter 2 years ago, it's not a good time for you to come back in their lives. They're still grieving her. And that's what sent me into a dark night of the soul. And I basically gave up on any hope for a loving personal God or power of prayer for 8 years until my coma. And of course, very important in the story, and we don't have time to go into all the details, but the fact that I met my birth family, that occurred a year before my coma. And that is absolutely essential to all the events that unfolded in my coma. So anyway, yeah, but it's, in many ways, it's about that reclaiming of love. I did not feel worthy of love. And many adoptees who were left behind by their birth mother, are challenged with that kind of thing, that they're really not worthy of love. And I struggle with that. And that was absolutely a huge part of what happened with my NDE and recovery from it, was a very strong proof of my kind of deep relationship with the universe and having a purpose for living and existing. So all of it comes out in the end, in the big story.
You were very fortunate it worked out that way for you. My older sister was adopted, and she actually tracked down her birth mother. I don't know how she did it, because as you know, it's very difficult. And her birth mother, she called her and was rejected by her totally. So
yeah, that is so sad. I hate hearing that kind of story, because that's what sent me into a tailspin. Even though if all the facts had been known by me, I'd realized that wasn't really the truth, just to be rejected and the door slammed in my face. But that's how I interpreted that rejection in early 2000. And it's what led to so many events that then unfolded and led to my meeting the birth family a year before coma, and then going into coma and having this extraordinary experience that depended extensively on that adoption story for its resolution. So that's why all of that had to be shared.
Well, you have talked about your experience countless times over the past few years, but for those of you who aren't familiar with your near-death experience, would you mind sharing exactly what caused your hospitalization and the coma in the first place, and then what you actually experienced during your NDE?
Yeah, and I'll be very brief, because this is covered in great detail in Living in, Proof of Heaven, and the follow-up books, Map of Heaven, but especially the true sequel to Proof of Heaven, which is Living in a Mindful Universe. And that's the one that was co-written with my partner, Karen Newell. But just to kind of get as quickly as possible through your question by giving the proper details, important to point out that my NDE was a little atypical, because I had no memory of Eben Alexander's life. And most NDEs you hear about, the soul that's going through it, when they're going through those events, they have some memory of the events and characters in their life. But I really had an empty slate, and that it only became clear to me in the months and years afterwards why that was so important. But it actually led to a tremendous amount of knowledge that I would not have gained otherwise. I would have, if this had been scripted more generally, for example, if I had scripted it, I would have put my adoptive father front and center as the spiritual guide for my journey. And yet he was nowhere to be found. He had passed over 4 years before my coma. And I had a very different spiritual guide, as you will hear. So in this very amnesic setting, not remembering anything of Earth or this universe or any of our language or concepts, as humans, it started in the earthworm's eye view, a very primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm. And it seemed to last for ages, but luckily it didn't last forever. And I was rescued because there came a slowly spinning white light, a pure, clear light that came associated with a perfect musical melody. And that light came out of this murky darkness of what I call the earthworm's eye view. And it opened up into this brilliant kind of portal into a gateway valley, into a much more real realm, a realm far more real than this realm. That's the thing that's so shocking and hard to describe to people. People often think an NDE is going to be murky and dreamlike. Well, no, this world we live in is murky and dreamlike. That realm and those experiences are sharp, clear, detailed, memorable, meaningful, astonishing in their kind of clarity of presentation. And that's one of the reasons these experiences are so challenging to talk about. Our language just doesn't do it justice. Now, in that gateway valley, I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. There were millions of other butterflies looping and spiraling in these vast formations. And below us was this meadow, a perfect meadow that was filled with plant life and surrounded by a dense forest. And the plant life, I remember seeing buds and blossoms, flowers, all of this dynamic living plant life opening up robustly down below me with no signs of any death or decay at all. And that's one of the most astonishing things, is that world is like Plato's world of ideals. It's kind of a world of perfection. But for an individual soul to reunite with higher soul, reunite with souls of departed loved ones, go through life reviews, plan next incarnations, all of those major kind of steps could occur in that gateway valley. Now, the best part about it was I wasn't alone. there was a beautiful young woman on the butterfly wing. And of course, that's the crucial element to the story that evolves much later, 4 months post-coma. It was discovering the identity of that beautiful guardian angel. But her presence there was so important to me because of the kind of relief and the sense of being in a truly spiritual home that she gave me. And her message to me was never conveyed in words. She never spoke a word. She didn't have to. She looked at me with this look of pure love, with these sparkling blue eyes, high forehead, high cheekbones, soft brown hair framing a beautiful face. And as she looked at me, her emotional awareness and truth came into my knowing. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are deeply cared for. And I cannot tell you how reassuring and affirming that message was. And it came around the time that I was also aware of this, what I called a summer breeze, a soft summer breeze that blew through, and it changed my awareness of everything, even though the scene stayed the same and the way I would describe it stayed the same. That breeze, I referred to it as the breath of God or the divine wind. It was my first knowing of the presence of that infinitely loving and healing God force that reigned all through this realm and the lower realms and higher realms and every bit of it. But that was my awareness of it. And I remember sensing that incredible sense of love and of comfort. And it was there also associated with this beautiful girl on the butterfly wing who relayed that message to me. And I remember seeing thousands of beings dancing in the meadow down below us. And when I wrote it all up weeks later, I said there were souls between lives. There was lots of joy and merriment, and all the festivities were being fueled because up above were these swooping orbs of angelic choirs that were emanating these chants or anthems or hymns that would just thunder through my awareness. And I remember that those angelic choirs provided the next portal. And I remember seeing all of what I viewed as kind of the lowest realm, the four-dimensional space-time and the material realm, all of that collapsing down. But then all of this, this kind of intermediate realm of the Gateway Valley with a completely different ordering of causality. When I say that, you need to envision, for example, those life reviews occurring there is not just people remembering events of their lives, they're reliving the events in a very real sense, and often from the emotional perspective of others around them who might have been influenced by their actions and even their thoughts. And I remember seeing all of that collapsing down, that deep time ordering of that kind of set of events that shows you that that whole realm is already well outside of what we call Earth time. And Earth time is only here to support the stage setting for the drama in a very limited fashion. There's a much richer sense of kind of evolution of souls and of all of consciousness apparent from that spiritual realm. And it turns out that the next portal up, leading me through those angelic choirs, was witnessing all of these realms collapsing down until I was out into what I call the core. The core is infinite inky blackness, but filled to overflowing with the healing love of that divine God force. And in the core realm, all dualities are resolved. There's no more of this kind of stage setting of the earth staging of that view or of the Gateway Valley. But in the core realm, oneness with the divine and complete resolution of all the dualities that we're used to in this world, like masculine, feminine, good, bad, dark, light, etc. Every bit of that comes together in that core realm. And there was a brilliant orb of light that I saw as an interpreter or translator. And I was taught so many things in the core realm, and I would keep going back in there and then spontaneously falling back down to the earthworm's eye view. And several passages through all of this is what resulted in the multiple kind of lessons and observations and things that I brought back to this world. But I was always told in the core realm, not in words, but the linguistic conceptual flow was crystal clear. You are not here to stay. You'll be going back. I'd even come to believe that going back was just going back to the earthworm's eye view, because that's where I generally ended up after tumbling out of this sanctum sanctorum of the divine, the core realm. And I would always just remember the musical notes of the melody, and that enabled me to conjure up that musical melody again that took me up into the Gateway Valley, always reassured by that lovely guardian angel on the butterfly wing, always witnessing those same beautiful scenes going through the core realm, and often lessons taught there too. But ultimately, the angelic choirs would provide that portal to that highest level again and again. But there came a time when I could no longer conjure up the musical notes of that melody. I could remember them, but they didn't bring the portal up that took me from the gateway, from the earth from my view to the Gateway Valley. To say I was sad at that time would be an understatement, but I also knew I could trust that I would be taken care of. I've been promised that through these multiple passages through the Gateway Valley and the core. And that was when I saw these faces going off into the distance. There were thousands of beings and heads bowed like that, some holding candles, this murmuring energy. And what I called all that, in the weeks later when I was writing it all up, I called it the power of prayer. And I was just seeing and witnessing this incredible kind of miracle of having this beautiful, joyous, prayerful energy that these people were offering, giving me the same comfort that to that time had only been available in the Gateway Valley and in the core realm. But now I was feeling it way down in these lowest realms, near to the, kind of the material realm and all the lowest stuff that I didn't even really know about or remember. So when they said you're going back, I didn't know where it was. I thought maybe it's this Gateway Valley, but it turned out no, it was to the material realms below. And that's when I saw 6 faces bubbling up out of the muck. They would say a few words. I couldn't understand the words. They disappear. That was it. But the important thing about those 6 faces is 5 of them were physically present in the ICU room the last 24 hours I was in coma. So they served as what are called veridical time anchors that showed me that the vast majority of my coma experience had to happen between days 1 and 4, or days 1 and 5 at the most. All the reasons for every bit of that's explained in the book. But those veridical time anchors were very important because I recognized them when I then woke up, on day 7 of coma. But the important thing to point out to people is when I woke up, my brain was wrecked. My doctors had already, gone on record saying that I had a 10% chance of survival early in the week, and that had gone down to a 2% chance of survival after a week on the ventilator, not responding to 3 powerful intravenous antibiotics. And that's when on that Sunday morning, they held the family conference where they recommended, since I'd gone to a 2% chance of survival, no chance of recovery, it was time to stop the antibiotics and let me go. And Bond overheard that information. He was my 10-year-old son. They protected him from the worst news during that week, but he came running down the hallway, pulled open my eyelids, one eye looking up there, another eye looking over there, neither pupil responding. Anybody in medicine know that's a horrible picture. I promise you, I did not hear him with my ears or seeing with my eyes, but he was pleading with me. Words I didn't understand, but it was the nature of his pleading that drew me back to this world. Daddy, you're going to be okay. Daddy, you're going to be okay. I said, somehow that would make it so. And I followed that lead and I came back to this world. But my mother, my sisters, my son standing at the bedside, I had no idea who they were. All I knew was where I'd just been, this extraordinary spiritual journey that was burned into my memory. Astonishingly, all my prior memories were gone. And of course, I originally explained all that as a neurosurgeon defaulting to my old beliefs of the brain stores memory, which we, in our Living in a Mindful Universe book, go into great detail about all the evidence now why that's not the case. We now realize memories are not stored in the brain, but that was my default position early on. So I thought, well, I guess the reason I explain all this amnesia is that I had this horrific case of meningoencephalitis that wrecked all 8 lobes of my brain. Well, it turns out the memories came back quickly. Language and childhood memories came back literally over hours and days. All my semantic knowledge of neuroscience came back over 2 months. And many of those memories were more complete after they came back than they had been before my coma. So all of that, a tremendous mystery. We go into much more detail in the books, but suffice it to say, there's a medical case report on my medical records that came out 10 years after my coma from 3 doctors who were not involved in my care, but were absolutely fascinated by this miraculous recovery that defies any kind of medical explanation. There's no similar case in the medical literature, although there are other reports in the medical literature of people with profound near-death experiences who then had miraculous healing. That's where the action is in discussing this. And that's where the peer reviewers of the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases actually allowed that was the best explanation for my recovery, was this the fact that I had the NDE, which shows you great wisdom on behalf of the peer reviewers, that was enough of an explanation for them as to how I could enjoy this miraculous recovery.
You obviously, after you recovered, were very curious about near-death experiences, did a lot of research. How common are they actually?
Well, they're actually quite common, probably anywhere between 10 and 20 million Americans have had an NDE. And if you look at cardiac arrest population, those people who have a cardiac arrest, probably around 15 to 20% of those people end up having a near-death experience. And that's the most common thing that drives people near death in our modern world. So that's a lot of people out there. I mean, millions, tens of millions of people around this world have had these experiences. Although, unfortunately, they're so shockingly real, people oftentimes won't talk about them. They think maybe they'll be judged crazy by their doctor or something. And I tried to explain it to my doctors, before any of my medical knowledge had come back at all. And they would just pat me on the back and say, well, you were very, very sick, but your brain was soaking in pus. In fact, we have no idea how you're even coming back to us now. But you can forget about it. The dying brain plays all kinds of tricks. Well, the dying brain doesn't play that kind of trick to where you have a complete documented decimation of the neocortex and all the major lobes of the brain, and you have the most extraordinary, phenomenal, detailed, and memorable experience of a lifetime. That's all worthy of sharing. So that's essentially why I wrote the book, and I was hoping to open up the medical community's eyes and open up the world at large so that these tens of millions of people will all share their experiences.
Has that changed? Has the medical community, do you see any movement forward in terms of their accepting this?
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous amount of movement forward in shaping this up. And probably one of the greatest data points that is going to have a giant impact going into the future is something that's just occurred in the last year. And that was a contest. It was hosted by Robert Bigelow. He's an aerospace entrepreneur out in Las Vegas. And he held a contest with $1.8 million in prize money for the best essay on the best scientific evidence for the survival of consciousness after permanent bodily death. And he received more than 1,000 applicants who wanted to participate in this contest. They only allowed in about 206 or so groups to write papers, and all those groups had to demonstrate at least 5 years of working experience of pursuing this question in a scientific fashion. And so those 29 papers are now available for free to the reading public at bigelowinstitute.org. And if you just start with number one, Jeffrey Mishlov's incredibly erudite and informative essay, he's been working in this field as a parapsychologist for more than 5 decades. And he wrote an incredibly good manuscript, but there are many other very good papers there. And the 29 winners, I would say they're all excellent essays, and they approach it from different ways, points of view. But the day when you have some materialist scientists saying, well, these things are impossible, you can't have an NDE because it defies everything you know about brain and mind, those days are over, because that kind of absolutely willful ignorance on behalf of some who pretend to be scientific is gone. This essay contest from Bigelow has completely eradicated that excuse of willful ignorance moving forward. And we no longer have to pay attention to people who are unaware of the literature. The literature is very clear on this. The afterlife and reincarnation are fully supported by the scientific investigation of these phenomena. And now it's just up to us to understand how they happen. Whether or not they're real has been proven beyond any reasonable doubt, thanks to the Bigelow essays.
How did your career and your life in general change after your NDA? How would you describe it?
Well, I would say everything changed dramatically. One thing that's my entire view of the world and of people, of my fellow beings on this world, and of animals and of their spiritual nature, all of that changed dramatically. My coma journey showed me in no uncertain terms the power of kind of mind and consciousness, especially when liberated from the shackles of the physical body. And in fact, I would say some of the deepest and most profound lessons that come from all of this will have to do with our abilities to heal. Medical science has looked at placebo effect for 6 decades as the gold standard for any new treatment modality. When we look at a new medicine or sometimes a new procedure, we compare it to placebo or to a sham procedure. And that's because medical science for more than 6 decades has recognized the power of beliefs, thoughts, and attitudes to govern our ability to heal ourselves. So placebo effect is just the beginning. And that's roughly a 30% barrier that is there for big pharma to overwhelm if they want to prove any new treatment can beat someone's belief that they're taking something that can make them better. But it goes far beyond just a sugar pill fixing a headache. If you go to noetic.org, Institute of Noetic Science's website, put in the search term spontaneous remission, you'll get a book they published in the mid-1990s that has more than 3,500 cases of healing of advanced cancers, infections, et cetera, beyond any medical intervention through people's beliefs, thoughts, and attitudes that help them to get better. And there's a beautiful book by Kelly Turner called Radical Remission, which is based on the 1,000+ cases in that database of cancer. And she basically identifies 6 of 9 features that she found to be important in all those healings of those cancer patients. 6 of them are spiritual features having to do with, for example, how you treat your kind of emotional baggage, and are you able to process negative emotional things? Are you able to build up and have a repertoire of positive emotional things? Is there a kind of a focus on meaning and purpose in your life, and a focus on your spiritual well-being? All of these things are identified by Kelly Turner in Radical Remission as being important tools that help those people cure cancer and infection beyond any medical intervention. The good news is that Helene Wabe is currently updating that database at Institute of Noetic Sciences with 30 more years of data. That'll be an extraordinary and exciting new data set to help inform people of how much power we have to bring healing into our lives through prayer, through these spiritual adjustments, and really taking a free will charge of our lives more than we're allowed to do in this kind of materialist culture that pretends that we don't even have free will. And right at the core of materialist science is that particular notion that free will is an illusion, because it's all just chemical reactions and electron fluxes giving us an illusion of consciousness. That is not true. My life has changed dramatically from coming into all of this much richer knowledge of our ability to heal self and others, the power of prayer to bring the world into alignment with our kind of highest hopes and dreams. Everything has shifted for me because of this tremendous awakening.
Dr. Alexander, I have 2 friends who have recently been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. You just mentioned a book, Spontaneous Remission. That I'm assuming
it's called Radical Remission.
Oh, Radical.
The name of the book.
Okay, thank you.
Radical Remission by Kelly Turner.
So I would think, would recommend that highly to people to take a look at. Are there other
resources?
Resources?
Absolutely. I
other
would.
Resources?
Well, there are many resources. It depends on exactly what you're looking for. But in terms of healing, people, that kind of healing, I would say that that's an excellent starting point, is Radical Remission by Kelly Turner. And then really to learn more about that, I would start with those Bigelow essays. They're a tremendous resource for people to come into knowing the truth of not only the afterlife, but also of reincarnation. And we have to explain these things. They're much bigger aspects of life than our materialist scientific model would put out there. And yet learning more about this, that's why our book, not only Proof of Heaven, I think has been very helpful to people, especially with all the kind of death and bereavement of the COVID pandemic, but certainly Map of Heaven, and especially the true sequel to Proof of Heaven, Living in a Mindful Universe, goes a long way towards teaching people about meditative techniques, about sacred acoustics, which is a form of binaural brainwave entrainment that I use daily personally, in my own efforts of healing self and others. I spend an hour or 2 a day meditating. But in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, we explain a lot about those tools. and how anyone can use them to come into their own kind of form of healing. And then if you go to ebenalexander.com, there's also a reading list that's very extensive and categorized. That makes it a little easier to use depending on what people are using it for. And I also rank my top 3 or so choices in each category. But the reading list on ebenalexander.com has more than 100 entries, books, including a lot of scientific papers, and that includes the hot link to the paper itself.
Great.
So it's a very useful library for people to get into all this kind of knowledge and understanding.
And you also, there is a link that we will put up on our website as well at Normandale to a free meditation that's through the acoustic program.
Right.
That is
right,
really
through
amazing.
Sacred Acoustics.
Yeah, I tried it yesterday and I couldn't believe how relaxed I felt after going through that. It was a really incredible experience.
Well, there's actually a pilot study in the peer-reviewed medical literature about that sacred acoustics technology that's very favorable. It was written by Dr. Anna Yusim. The pilot study came out in February of 2020, and it basically showed a 27% reduction in anxiety symptoms in her patients in a busy Manhattan psychiatric practice over 2 weeks' time, compared to only 7% improvement in people who had standard talk therapy but without the sacred acoustics tones. And I think for people who read that case report, you can get a lot of information about the value of this, especially for healthcare practitioners who would like to use it. And also we have a training course for healthcare practitioners that is bundled. And this link is good for not just for therapists who want to use that, but also there's a beautiful course that we've run for the first 18 months of the pandemic, interviewing people that normally we would see at meetings, people who are thought leaders globally on consciousness research, other experiencers, et cetera. And all of that is available at unitedinhopeandhealing.com. So if people go to unitedinhopeandhealing.com, you'll find that practitioner course, which does have a price attached to it, but also the interview series. Every 2 weeks for 18 months, we interviewed people, and that's all available for free at that United in Hope and Healing. So a bunch of resources for people to really get up to speed, and certainly just to learn about the meditation, go to sacredacoustics.com. That's where you find the free 20-minute download, listen with headphones or earbuds. But there are many, many, many other options available at Sacred Acoustics. Plus, you'll find it a very valuable website because, I want to do this or that. You reunite with souls of departed loved ones, get greater creativity in work. I want to experience prayer and healing, things like whatever you're kind of wanting to do. There are many different options available at the Sacred Acoustics website, and she has a pathway that's very specific for the different things that people might desire.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for that great background. One of the other books you mentioned that I heard you mentioned in another interview was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book, which helped you a great deal come to a deeper understanding of what you experienced. Which book is that? And tell us a little bit more about that.
I mentioned all that in Proof of Heaven. It was the book of Life After Death. And it is absolutely a stunning book in its own right. She's written extensively about all this, of course. She was one of the great leaders of the field, even ahead of Raymond Moody, who got into it in 1975 with his book, Life After Life. But that beautiful book of Life After Death by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, that story on page 28 of the girl who had a profound welcome to heaven from her brother, but came back to this world mystified because she didn't have a brother. And that's when her father said, well, you did have one, but we never told you about him. He died 3 months before you were born. And when I read that story, I looked up at that picture I just received in the mail. I mean, all that, I'm not going to spoil the story for anybody who's going to read Proof of Heaven, because that is absolutely a mind bender that grabs people, the power of that aspect of the story in my journey.
Yeah. You also have referenced, I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce his name correctly, Dr. Christopher, is it Carr or Kerr?
I think it's
Um,
Kerr.
okay, and it's Death is But a Dream, and he was a hospice doctor. Can you tell us a little bit about that book as well?
Right. He's a hospice doctor in Buffalo, New York, and he recently wrote this beautiful book, Death is But a Dream, where he goes into great detail about the kind of visions and experiences that people have as they approach death. And what you find, no surprise to anybody who's paying attention to this, is they line up perfectly with the stories of near-death experiencers and also of shared death experiencers. Shared death happen to people who are normally physiologically very healthy, like a loved one who might either be at the bedside or they could be 1,000 miles away when a patient is dying. But the fact is their soul goes along on the journey. That's what a shared death experience is all about, even to the point of witnessing a full-blown life review before the bystander soul comes back to this world. But no surprise that Christopher Kerr, in this beautiful discussion where he finds, I think it's 86% of the patients in his study had a profound experience towards the end of life that they said was real, absolutely real, often involving encountering the soul of a departed loved one who's there to escort them over. Happened to my mother when she passed in April of 2019. She had a beautiful vision. Her last 4 days, she was unresponsive to anybody. But 2 days before she passed at 2:30 in the morning, she woke up and she was aware of her own mother being there. When I heard that, I knew it was an authentic experience. You know, the me before coma, when I heard about the deceased loved one showing up, I said, oh, it's a hallucination. I now know that's the imprimatur that tells you it's an absolutely real experience. Don't be doubting it. You know, and these stories come out more and more in the medical community all the time. And we find that that is truly one of the kind of hallmarks of NDEs around the world, going back thousands of years across all belief systems, is when the soul of a departed loved one appears to you. And there's plenty of evidence that these are not just imaginary or hallucinations or dreams. When you read this gigantic literature, you start to realize all that. But it's, I think Christopher Kerr's work is a beautiful kind of complement to all the NDE work. And, you know, it just helps us to realize that we're much more than just birth to death and nothing more, and that our soul has a real existence that goes beyond the end of our physical body.
My husband had an experience of hearing his mother, who was dying of cancer, having a conversation with her departed mother. And it has remained so vivid in his memory. So it's really wonderful to hear you talk about that. And I think he would really benefit from reading that, that book as well. It was an incredible experience.
Beautiful stories.
Yeah. Well, another organization that you frequently reference is the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies. Can you tell us a little bit about that group and the work that they do?
Well, yes, they anybody can go to their website, uvadops.org, and I highly recommend you go there. There's plenty of material to read and resources, books, et cetera, et cetera. They're a scientific group who've been studying these kind of phenomena ever since the 1960s, when Dr. Ian Stevenson, who was the head of psychiatry at University of Virginia, heard of stories of children who remembered past lives. And he thought he would, you know, examine these stories and figure out what their psychiatric problem was. Well, what he ended up doing was finding out that these stories, when you really did the homework, remember this is in the 60s and 70s, long before the internet, so you had to do a lot of homework to uncover whatever these children were reporting as a past life. But given that the majority of those particular stories, especially the early ones, seem to happen fairly closely geographically to where the other person had lived and died, they found that they could start uncovering these stories. And today, of the 2,500 cases that they have of past life memories in children suggestive of reincarnation, 1,700, and these are all at UVA. There are other investigators around the world who do this work too. Jim Matlock, Harland Erlander, and others. There are other investigators. But the important thing is that 1,700 of those 2,500 have been solved in the UVA system. And that solved means they found the person that is being reported. And especially, you know, when many of these cases were there before the internet. And of course, it's why it's important to report them very early nowadays, because what you don't want is someone committing fraud, someone going out and digging up and making up a story from the internet and then trying to pretend that that's the case. Occasionally, fraudsters do try and present such cases, but Jim Tucker, who does the current work, and other investigators, know all the different ways to get in there and prove or disprove a story, and they're very serious about documenting these stories fully. But the University of Virginia, they've worked not only on the reincarnation cases, that's Jim Tucker's work today, but also Bruce Grayson, who's been there more than 45 years, has been the head of all their research on near-death experiences. And he's probably written more than any other MD on earth about near-death experiences, and is truly a wonderful resource. In addition, Ed Kelly's done tremendous work there in the work of parapsychology, and his 3 books, he's written many more, of course, but the 3 main recent books that he edited, Irreducible Mind in 2008, Beyond Physicalism in 2015, and then Consciousness Unbound in 2021, are 3 of the most profound scientific refutations of the simplistic and bleak nonsense of materialist science in the modern world. So for any deeply scientific mind out there who wants to get into this, dive into Ed Kelly's 3 books, and you'll realize we're far, far, far beyond the simplistic discussions of materialist scientists trying to pretend that these events can't be because they're just impossible based on all we know scientifically. False. There's a tremendous amount we know scientifically that is working together to support all this. So, it's an extraordinary time to be alive. And I would say that, in essence, some of the deep and profound realizations they're coming to in a scientific sense around the nature of reality, in many ways echo and mirror what the spiritual traditions, both East and West, have been saying going back thousands of years. These concepts of oneness and of love and the healing force of love, that we're all truly in this together, not just humans, but with all life and sentience throughout the cosmos. We really need to treat each other with much greater kind of respect and honor this one mind that we're all sharing. So there's a tremendous amount of growth that this world can come to that will also involve responsibility for our decisions we're making. So much of the problems of our modern world are the selfish greed of the false model of separatism of materialist science. It's not true. Quantum-informed science of consciousness paints much more richly to we're all in this together. To hurt another is to hurt yourself. That's why the life review, which is probably present anywhere from 25 to 50% of NDEs going back thousands of years, the life review is a beautiful example of the golden rule, because people often describe it as you feel the impact of your actions and thoughts on others from their emotional perspective. That's what the life review is. It's not reliving or remembering the things from your own perspective. It's reliving it from the perspective of others. So if you handed out a lot of pain and suffering to others during your lifetime, you have to feel that in your life review. I think that's where our concepts of hell came from. People who mistreated others, and then they have a life review where they have to receive all that. That's no fun. And I think that's where a lot of our concepts of hell have come from, because you certainly don't find a threat of eternal hell and damnation in these kind of stories. And of course, in past life memories in children, of course, they're coming back after having left a physical incarnation. But all the work of Christopher Kerr and certainly all the NDE work in all different directions, the deathbed visions that might be there, for example, in hospice, work in prisons and things like that. It really just reflects this beautiful, loving ambience that is so commonly referred to in NDEs, and shows us that that's really how we need to live. We can't pretend otherwise and lead our life mistreating others, and then at the end of the day claim to have, all of a sudden become rescued by some vision. We really have to lead our lives treating others as they should be treated. And that's why I think the most important lesson from NDEs and from all this discussion is not what happens when you die, but far more importantly, how do you best live this life today in all the choices you make today in dealing with yourself and other fellow beings? And that's where I think the rich lessons of love and compassion, kindness, forgiveness, and mercy that come out of near-death experiences should color all of our choices in how to live these lives.
That is a wonderful way to conclude. I can't thank you enough for your time and all the wonderful background that you've given to us and all these exceptional resources that you've referenced as well. And I'm assuming that the best place if people want to learn more is to go to your website and go from there.
I think, yes, go to ebenalexander.com. Highly recommend people investigate unitedinhopeandhealing.com, and of course sacredacoustics.com for those who want to learn a lot more about the meditation, and of course the books, Proof of Heaven, Map of Heaven, and Living in a Mindful Universe go into a lot more detail and organization about all of these things.
Thank you so very much for being with us today. This has been incredible. We thank you for your time, your willingness to talk about your experience. Very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's great talking with you, and hopefully we can do it again someday.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you.
Before we
bye-bye.
Goodbye, and thank you again. And before we conclude today's program, I want to acquaint you with some of the other outstanding leaders and innovators in the field of health and wellness who are going to be joining us over the next several months. Our April guest will be Guy Finley, author of over 45 books, including his acclaimed international best-selling book, The Secret of Letting Go. He is a self-help writer, a spiritual teacher, practical philosopher, and he's also the founding director of the Life of Learning Foundation, which is a nonprofit center for self-discovery. In May, Florence Williams will be joining us. She's the author of Heartbreak, A Personal and Scientific Journey. To gain her way back to health from a really wrenching divorce, she tested her blood for genetic markers of grief, underwent electrical shock treatment, and also ventured into the wilderness in search of awe as an antidote to loneliness. Her book is really an amazing merging of science and self-discovery, and it really changes the way we think about loneliness, health, and what it means to fall in and out of love. And in June, our guest will be Dr. Robert Maurer, author of the book One Small Step Can Change Your Life. Based on the practice of Kaizen and irrefutable scientific research, he maintains that no matter what the challenge is, great change is made through small steps. And the science is irrefutable since small steps circumvent the brain's built-in resistance to new behavior. So he will be with us and he will help us incorporate that kind of information into our own lives. So we are so fortunate that Learning Well programs are archived. So if you wish to explore past conversations with such leaders in the field of health and wellness as cardiologist Dr. Joel Kahn, or cancer survivor and author of the healing platform Annie Brandt, please feel free to browse the archived Learning Well programs. And all of these programs, as well as others, can simply be found by Googling Normandale Community College Learning Well. In closing, I want to thank our guest, Dr. Eben Alexander, and the Integrative Health Education Center at Normandale Community College for their continuing support of Learning Well. And I'd also like to thank you for taking time out of what I'm sure is a very busy schedule to join us today. I hope you can join us next month for our conversation with best-selling author Guy Finley. And until then, stay well.